Welcome to ADF TV. My name is Frank Nimphius and I'm from the Oracle JDevelop and ADF Product Management team. In this session we talk about task flow interaction or region communication pattern. And in particular what we do is we talk about the communication channel you can set up between a region to call back into parent view. Use cases requiring this kind of communication include the returning of values from a region to the parent view, the invocation of functionality on the parent view. Think about the dynamic tab shell template where from a region, from a tab, you might want to change the label of the tab to italic to indicate that there is a change of the data state within the region. Or you want to navigate the parent view. So if the parent view, for instance, is a browser page, you want to navigate maybe from a storefront or for a shopping page to a checkout page. And then if you work within a dynamic region, chances are what you want to do is you want to switch the task flow that is exposed in the region. So kind of replacing the current task flow in this region with a new one. Now for all of these we do have patterns, and as you will see, some of the patterns make assumptions, and I had this discussion on ADF TV where we talked about how loosely coupled should a task flow be, and we distinguish task flow between implementation details and standalone exposed task flows to the application developers. Now some of these patterns have dependencies, and based on the use case, and remember what I said last time in the overview presentation, use case really matters. If your use case doesn't mind about dependencies, then you might find a bunch of options to perform a specific task that you have a requirement for. So let's have a look what we can do. One of the techniques that we introduce in this session is called Chaperone. Now this is basically a bean reference injection. So you're referencing a bean from the bounded task flow that has its origin within the page view or in the parent page. Another option is to use a region navigation listener to listen for navigation in a region. Another one is the parent action, which is a tag that you can add to a bounded task flow within the bounded task flow navigation to then trigger navigation on the parent view. And I will introduce that in this session as well. We don't talk in this session about two other techniques. One of the techniques is a shared data control. The shared data control works on the data level. Now, if you have a shared data control set up for the bounded task flow exposed in a region, and this is shared with the parent view, then for every dependent collection, a change of the row state within the region will have an impact to the row state and the row currency that is displayed in the parent page. You will have to do a partial page refresh though, and this could either be an automatic partial refresh. So if you, for instance, use the change event policy that you can configure on an iterator, if you set this to PPR, then this is the effect that we call auto PPR, because the table itself will recognize that it needs to refresh in response to a change in the row currency. And then you can do a manually partial page refresh, which requires to use the reference bean injection. So you see already that we are lining up patterns and mixing patterns, and this is why I said use case really matters. And the last option is the most powerful option, which is contextual events. Contextual events is a publish and subscribe system on the ADF binding layer. It's pretty heavyweight and it's not easy to implement, to be honest. However, it's very powerful and it really gets you going a long way, even within deeply nested regions, as we will see in the next recording when we talk about region-to-region interaction. However, keep in mind contextual events work in all directions. So the first pattern to introduce is Chaperone. As we see here in this little diagram, we do have a bounded task flow, and this bounded task flow has an input parameter defined. Now this input parameter accepts a bean injection. So that is, we have a managed bean that we need to configure in view scope on the page flow, parent page, and then we configure the input parameter through the region parameters as a reference to this bean in the parent view. Now the input parameter reference will be saved within the bounded task flow in another managed bean, which will expose a property of the type of the bean that you're injecting. So if your bean is kind of called a reference bean, then you will have a setter and a getter in the managed bean in the bounded task flow for the type of reference bean. My recommendation is just work with an interface. So define an interface for the bean that you want to inject, and this way you have it easy, so you don't rely on knowing about the exact physical Java class name of the parent view managed bean you want to inject. So once the bean is injected, the bounded task flow in the region can access this bean reference and invoke methods on it. So it can invoke methods, for instance, to close a tab. It can invoke methods to issue a partial refresh. So if there's a method that will perform partial refresh on the page view, then that's possible. Or what you can do, you can also return values through this, because if there is a method that accepts an argument, now this argument could be a list, and you just return a list of values, and then the outer bean, the bean in the view scope and the parent page will understand what to do. Well, you might wonder, how does it work and how can it work? Because obviously the view scope bean on the parent page is in a smaller scope than the page flow scope bean, which is in the region. However, keep in mind that the region can only exist for as long as the page is active. So if you move out of a page to another page, which is when the view scope actually will be dismissed, that's actually also the end of the region on that page, which means that page flow scope in this case has the same length as view scope. So let's have a look at the example here. In this example, we use the dynamic tab shell template, and those who work with the dynamic tab shell template, you know that there is a lot of functionality exposed of the dynamic tab shell template. One of the functionalities is to close the current tab, or just to set a label to italic to indicate a data change within the bounded task flow. Now this is accessed through a tab context, and if you read the white paper about the dynamic tab shell template, then you see it asks you to have an input parameter that you configure and reference for tab context. Now this tab context is the managed bean. It's following the same practice and principle as we do with our Chaperone technique. Now in this example here, we inject the bean from the parent view, which uses the dynamic tab shell, and what we want to do is we want to exit the bounded task flow that is exposed in a region. As I said, typically regions are not designed to be exit. Now, to exit a region, what you will have to do is you have to make sure that the region area, the instance that requires this task flow to run within, that this is closed or replaced by dummy or empty task flow. Now, in our case, we will just exit it, and then we want to make sure that the tab that discloses the region will be just closed and hidden. And for this, we need to call out to the dynamic tab shell template. And we do this in a method call activity. As you can see, one of the activities is a method call activity, and this method call activity now references the managed bean that gets injected as an input parameter to the region. Then it calls the method to close the current tab. And because we cannot stop navigation on an activity that is not a view, we continue to the return activity, and the return activity is the end of the task flow. So we can implement a return value. We can implement a function call from within the region, as you can see by this example. The next example is about navigation. So have a look at the screen here. So what we do have is we do have kind of a shopping cart scenario here, where we go over two views just to perform our shopping, and at the end what we want to do is we want to submit the purchase and want to go to a summary page or a checkout page that allows us to verify what we put into our basket and then maybe buy it. So what needs to be done here to get that working? Well, one of the information to share with you is that there is a listener on the AF region tag, which is called the region navigation listener. I'm not sure if you looked at that already, but this region navigation listener is an option to listen for activity within the region. So it's not looking at what happens to the region, like in the dynamic region case where you swap a region, but it looks into what happens within a region. And every navigation is an action that this region navigation listener will be notified about. So when I navigate from view 1 to view 2, what will happen is that this region navigation listener is invoked, and it's invoked in the context of the parent view, right? Because the AF region belongs to the parent view. Now, I can check from the event object if the view that I'm on is the same view I'm coming from, because I can compare between the last view and the current view, or I can check what is the status of the current view. Now, if I exit a region, so if I have a return activity on a task flow and the task flow will just exit, now what will happen is that the view ID that we see returns null. Now, null indicates, obviously, task flow is gone, operation is finished, so let's navigate on to the next page. So this is what I can do with it. Yeah? For this, all I need is a region navigation listener, and then the region navigation listener to programmatically navigate either a bounded task flow or whatever it is in. The way you navigate, don't know if you thought about this, would be to either have on the page, on the parent page, a button that you then queue the action on, or if the parent view is itself within the region, you can go back to see what we looked at when we talked about the parent page to region communication. We talked about a queue action event in region. Now what you would do is you would just call get parent on a component until you find an instance of rich region and then queue the navigation there. So there are different strategies to programmatically perform navigation within the bounded task flow. The second example I have for you is also dealing with navigation. So here, if we look at the bounded task flow, you see we have two views, and then we do have a little icon that obviously looks like, not really like a method call activity, but an activity that does something for us. And if you look at that, it's a parent activity. The parent activity is what you find in the component palette for the controller. And if you drag and drop this in, then you can navigate to this component. And by configuration, you can tell it to navigate the parent view, to navigate the root view, which is the browser view, just in case that you're in a nested region, which then doesn't allow you directly to grab out of the browser. You can call the root outcome so that this navigates off the browser page. And you can have a local navigation just in case all of the above navigation cases just fail. So you don't want to stay with an unhandled navigation case. And this is the parent call activity. You just drag and drop it in, and as the dialog shows, you configure the outcome name. Now, some of these strategies and pattern that I introduced in this session obviously have dependencies. Like even the parent activity will have some dependency. To overcome dependency, you could, for instance, for the parent activity, have an input parameter that passes in the outcome name of the navigation case to follow in response to an action when it calls the parent action, and then the parent action will be configured with expression language. So we can work around dependency. However, there's some dependency that we cannot work around, like if we use the shared data control.